element.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, and I'll be your host for the program. Before we get into today's interview, let me just remind everyone that our podcast is brought to you by MD Coaches, a company dedicated to developing and empowering physicians and other healthcare professionals to realize a greater potential and to achieve a greater level of satisfaction in their chosen fields. You can find MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com. You know, I think the thing that I enjoy the most about hosting Prescription for Success is that I get to talk to people in the world of healthcare who not only are doing things differently, but they are making a difference. And I think that very nicely sums up my interview guest today. He is Dr. Rob Lamberts, who is a board-certified internist and pediatrician from Augusta, Georgia. Rob has a fascinating story of having built a very successful primary care practice in his hometown over a period of about 18 years. And then he decided to walk away from the security of that established practice to open a new practice in direct primary care. And that was a huge risk, not only because he'd be leaving a very secure income stream, but because also he would be working in a practice model that had no real track record. If you've never heard of direct primary care, it's because it's still a very rare thing. It's a great story. I think you'll enjoy it. It's very inspiring. So now let's hear my interview with Dr. Rob Lamberts from Augusta, Georgia. And I have the pleasure today of having a conversation with Dr. Rob Lamberts from Augusta, Georgia. Rob is in practice both as an internist and a pediatrician, which we'll hear some more about later. So welcome to the show, Rob, and thank you so much for being here.
And thanks for having me, Randy.
Well, you've got a really interesting story, Rob, and there's so many things that I'd like to talk about, but as is always the case on Prescription for Success, I like to start with beginnings, and I'm very interested to know when you had the idea that you might be interested in medicine, and what do you think got you pointed in that direction?
Well, I grew up in Rochester, New York. My dad worked at Eastman Kodak, as usually people will segue in asking, well, your dad must have worked at Kodak. And yes, he did. He's actually a PhD in physics and worked in doing research and such.
So he was in the nuts and bolts.
Oh, yeah. He has a ton of patents and he's just brilliant. He's actually 93 years old right now and still does calculus for fun. So
no kidding.
He's my hero in a lot of ways. But
I can't imagine anybody having fun with calculus, but if he's doing it, God bless him.
I can't either, to be perfectly honest. But I grew up in a very scientific oriented family. And I ended up, I also grew up in a very musical family. My dad played bass for the Grand Rapids Symphony, and my mom played piano in organ in our church. And all of us kids had to do music. And there's a point to me talking about this. Yeah. So music was a huge important thing, and science was an important thing. And when I went through high school, I was actually not a great student in high school, just kind of an average student. But I got involved in doing musicals and singing, and realized that I actually have a pretty good singing voice. And started college because my dad wanted me to go into science. I started college as a music major.
No kidding.
Yeah, I was a vocal performance major.
Wow.
I also, we had to take piano lessons growing up. I learned to play the cello. I've taught myself guitar. I've been very much a musically oriented person. But anyway, I started college. I went to Houghton College in upstate New York, which is a small liberal arts college.
And I was going to say that interest in the rather broad education perhaps explains why you picked the liberal arts as opposed to one of the gigantic universities. Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
Well, go ahead. Pardon the interruption, but go ahead.
No problem. Anyway, so I started doing music and quickly realized that I was not going to. I wasn't going to be trained to do what I wanted to do, which was to be a rock star and sing in front of thousands of people. In fact, they were probably going to have me learn how to be a music teacher or sing opera or lead music in a church or something of that sort. So I ended up switching out of music. And since I had taken AP chemistry and actually done fairly well on the AP exam, I flipped over to chemistry, and I liked chemistry. So I started doing that, but I kept thinking,
at this point now, I presume you're probably somewhere in the middle, maybe sophomore or so.
Yeah, sophomore.
And you have still not made the decision that you're going to apply to medical school.
I actually had no idea that I was going to go into medicine. I hadn't even considered it yet at the beginning there. And part of the problem was that in our school, which was actually a fairly strong in sending people to medical school, the pre-meds were really annoying. They were not the type of people that I really liked. Because they were all about getting good grades. And so they would take easy courses so that they could get good grades, and they would find ways. And I grew up in a family where knowledge and education was important, but grades were not as important. Knowledge was important. And so that sounds kind of snobby, but I mean, it's really the way that I felt at that point in time. I took courses.
Well, I think it sounds like you got good guidance to me. That's really fabulous.
I did, and I took courses. And I had a philosophy minor. I had I took creative writing classes. Liberal arts was perfect for me. And so, but I knew that if I'm going to have to work at some point in time. So I really started thinking about it, and I started doing much better in my studies. I always like to say I think I had attention deficit disorder as a kid, and it was when I started drinking strong coffee and lots of it that I started doing well. That was my drug of choice in college, and I started doing well. But I knew that I didn't have it inside of me to be a researcher. I just didn't have the patience to do that. I didn't have the long view of things. I liked stuff right in front of me. I liked to be doing stuff. And I was a very social person in a lot of ways. I just liked to be around people and do stuff. I'm a bit of an extrovert, although I do have my introvert tendencies as well.
Well, now there's just one other thing. I do apologize for the constant interruptions, but one thing that I would like to know here is, at any point, were you getting any pressure from anywhere, parents or faculty advisor or whatever, to make a decision, to decide what you're going to do when you grow up? Was that kind of pressure ever put on you at all?
Not in college. My family's very educated, and it's not just there are 6 of us kids, and half of us have doctorates and half of us have master's degrees. But it wasn't that we were pressured. It was just I knew that after college I would do some sort of graduate school, and it wasn't that I had to and I felt pressured. It's just like I knew that I couldn't get the kind of job that I wanted if I didn't do that, and I wouldn't know enough if I just had the basics of chemistry. I mean, what do you do with a chemistry major?
Yeah.
And so I always kind of felt that way. And so I didn't feel like the time to make the decision was immediate. I just needed to know what direction I would go to. And really, that's when I started to consider medicine, where, um, what combines science, which I do love and I think is fascinating. I'm have a certain amount of competence at, but it also involves people, and so I kind of gradually moved towards that and took the MCAT and did really well on the MCAT. And my grades got good enough that I ended up getting into Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. Jefferson Medical College is where I ended up going. And
just one more question about making that decision for medical school. Were there any personalities along the way, any personal influencers that helped you make the decision, faculty at Houghton, or was it something that just popped into your head and you followed it?
It was more of the latter. I mean, I did have some friends who were pre-meds who I liked. I did have some folks who were smart people, but also, more eclectic in their view of things, not just single-minded. Yeah. And I had, my best friend in college was actually, he went to Jefferson, and he put in a good word for me with the admission people. Not that really matters if a sophomore says something, but the admission officer did actually mention my friend Harvey. And so he's who I ended up rooming with the whole 4 years I was in Philadelphia. So I would say that I did have some influence from people, but it was mainly just kind of picking out my course and where I kind of felt like I needed to go. And went to medical school, and I remember at the end of the first 2 years thinking, well, geez, if there was a course, if there was a job where I had to study hard and take a test, that would be the job for me, because that's what I've been trained to do. I didn't know how I would do on the clinicals and when I got out onto the wards, and I was actually pretty terrified. That common terror of a medical student feeling like I'm going to kill people.
So you actually felt the first 2 years, the non-clinical years, were really not so much of a struggle for you. I hear a lot of people say, the only difficult thing that I experienced about medical school was the volume of material that has to be ingested. It wasn't really academically difficult. Was that kind of your approach or not?
Yeah. I mean, it never was something that I felt like I couldn't do. Sure. And so the first 2 years were just, the limiting factor was how much work I put into it.
Right.
And if I put in enough work, I'd pass, and that's really what you need to do in medical school. And so I got through the first 2 years without any big hitch. And then I just remember, actually, the big thing for me was one of my first rotations was internal medicine, and I had no idea what it would be like. And it was at Jefferson, at the big academic university, at the academic setting.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved it. And I absolutely loved the interaction with people. I loved the problem solving. I loved the way that it worked. And it was like this big weight was lifted off of me, and it was like the heavens opened up and said, yep, this is what you're going to do. And you're in the right place. And
well, that's a really happy coincidence.
Yeah, it is. I was very grateful to have gone all that distance and found something that fit me so well. So that's my long story of how I became a doctor.
And so at that point, once you got into the the clinical years. Did you find that in any way terribly difficult or challenging in any way, or was it more a matter of what you were saying before? I'm in a place where I want to be and I feel comfortable, and that made it not to simplify it, I wouldn't say easy, but it sounds like you were comfortable throughout the process.
I really was. I would say that I felt like I had found my place in the world, which was, it was just a good feeling. And I mean, again, to say it was easy is not right. And I'll say that when I ended up in residency, that's where I felt like I was putting my foot down on the gas and really working hard. And I mean, not like medical school wasn't working hard, but there's always that safety net under you as a medical student. You really can't. It's very hard for a medical student to kill anybody.
I know.
You feel like you could, but the reality is, as a resident, on the other hand, we're given a lot more responsibility, and your level of responsibility goes up. And so, but no, the medical process, once I did that internal medicine rotation, I always felt like I was in the right place, and I never. So
you knew early on that it was probably going to be some form of primary care as opposed to the super specialties.
Yeah. Going in, the one thing that I kind of suspected was that I would do pediatrics, because I was I love to mess around with kids. I'm just kind of a silly guy, and so I feel very comfortable with children. And maybe that was because my little brother was 10 years younger than me, and I just fell in love with babies and fell in love with kids. And so it was medicine. It was taking care of adults and the elderly that actually surprised me. And then when it came to choose between the two, it was either family medicine or med peds. And med peds was kind of coming into its own at that point in time. And I ended up choosing the med peds route and actually went to Indiana University for that.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. To my knowledge, that was not available during my time of training back when they invented fire. But were there? I mean, was it rare to find a med peds program, or?
It was. What happened was that during medical school, I actually did my family medicine rotation up in Geisinger, which is in north eastern Pennsylvania. Beautiful, beautiful country, and it was a great rotation. But they also had a med peds program at that point in time. And it was funny because I remember talking to the med peds residents, because like, well, why would you do med peds? Why are you a masochist? Or why would you do 4 years? And why do they, and they ended up, the guy said, I look at the medicine residents, the family medicine residents, and they are so self-motivated. They read on stuff. They work so hard, and they work so hard out of when they're not seeing patients in the hospital, outside of the hospital. And he said, I'm not that way. I just need to experience it. I need to be kicked in the butt to learn stuff. And that really rang home to me, that I'm not the kind of guy, when I go home in the evening, I sit and read medical journals. I mean, I will do it some, but when I'm in, I don't want to have to learn to be self-taught or whatever. I just want my butt kicked the whole time. And that's not to say that family medicine doesn't do that, but I'll say that I actually specifically chose a med peds residency where I really felt like I was going to be really pushed by these people, that I didn't float to the top quickly. And there are some residencies where when I did an interview, you got the feeling that I would be one of their better residents at the start. Indiana wasn't that way at all. Indiana, there were some really brilliant people that I was working with, and it was a great environment where it was just this in-depth learning, and I came out of there feeling so confident in my medical abilities in both medicine and pediatrics. So,
well, it sounds like you were doing some unusually mature for your age critical thinking when you were making those decisions. And I mean, we kind of all of us are kind of in the same boat at that point. We're making big decisions about a great investment, but sounds like you managed to get yourself in exactly the right spot.
I did. I'm grateful to God for that as much as anything. I think I've made some other bad decisions in my life, so my critical thinking is certainly anywhere but spotless. But I am absolutely, yes, I feel like those decisions were good ones for me.
And so the residency experience was equally as satisfying for you as medical school, or not?
I think residency was more satisfying to me because
you're the real thing now, right?
Yeah, and because I felt like I was, it was still in the age where as a resident you were left on your own. And you had to, especially we had Wishart Hospital, which is kind of a Cook County public hospital type, or Grady, like that. It's and the residents ran the show there. And if you admitted a patient during the night, you didn't call the attendant. You just got them all taken care of. Now you might call a fellow if they have to go to the ER, if they have to go to the ICU, or if you have problems. But as senior resident, you were the one who made the choices. And the VA was a lot that way as well. There was not much hand holding. There was, you were up all night when you were on call a lot of times. And the ER was staffed by residents as well. And so it was you and your colleagues. And it just was one of the I was the most proud of myself when I was proud of myself when I finished medical school, but I was even more proud after residency. And again, the camaraderie between yourself and the other residents is unlike any other. So, I mean,
well, that's good
delightful.
to have gotten yourself trained. And, I talked to so many people that remember residency as being a trial by fire and an endurance contest, and to hear that it was a much more satisfying experience for you is, it's nice to know that it can happen that way.
Remember medical school? You were confident, studious, hardworking, and you learned what to expect in all manner of patient care. Then reality struck. Regulations, expenses, staff management, and administration. Is this what we signed up for? Stress on the verge of burnout, no time for family, or the reason we got into medicine. Helping people. What are the options when you're afraid you're in the wrong career? Transition, teach, quit? What if there was another way? MD Coaches can help. We're a team of medical professionals with a century of experience in the clinical and business sides of medicine. More importantly, MD Coaches has been where you are, stressed and trying to navigate a world school didn't prepare us for. MD Coaches is your mentor, your confidant, to help you make your practice shine, navigate administrations, and successfully lead staff and projects. Or if you're ready to transition, we can help there too. MD Coaches is doctors helping doctors. Visit our website to receive a free, no-obligation consultation. Go to mymdcoaches.com/RX. That's mymdcoaches.com/RX. Isn't it time someone else was on your side? Don't let the business of being a doctor stop you from doing what you love. That site again? mymdcoaches.com/RX. Visit us today.
Physician Outlook is a new magazine platform built for physicians and by physicians, and it's designed to showcase unique physician talents. Sometimes it might be clinical talents, but mostly it's about the intersection between clinical and non-clinical talents, whether it be writing or painting or cooking or maybe even making a political statement in front of a state and local governing body or even at the nation's capital, and dozens of other things. It's available online and in print. It's visually stunning on all of its platforms. I promise it's really unique in terms of physician lifestyle magazines. I think you'll really enjoy it. We think it's just the thing to fill your prescription for success. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook magazine amplifies the voice of any doctor who has something to say, and also uniquely engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get $20 off an annual subscription fee by visiting rxforsuccesspodcast.com/Physician Outlook. To move the story along a little bit, how did you end up in Augusta, Georgia? There are not many New Yorkers there.
No. Well, actually, there are more than you think, because the fort down here.
Right. And I spent 5 years in Augusta myself. I know it is actually a fairly diverse community. But
it's not. Yes, it seems like, well, why Augusta? My wife at the time, she was from Oklahoma. I was from New York, and she had a couple of sisters in Charlotte and Asheville. And we wanted to move closer to some family because Indiana was far from everybody. And so we looked around and decided that we both agreed on the Southeast. And basically I found another med-peds doctor down here, who I joined up with, who subsequently actually ended up going to Africa to work doing missions. But it was, Augusta just seemed like a good opportunity and it felt right. And so we moved down here in 1994.
So when you moved there was an individual that you were going to partner with in a practice. Is that right?
Right.
And this is when you all formed the Evans Medical Group? That's
correct. Right? That's correct.
Now, and was this, in looking at your bio, it looks like this was actually a hospital-owned practice. Is that correct?
It was. It was initially a hospital-owned practice, but we actually flipped out of that within a couple of years because the hospital realized that they weren't very good at doing it. And it was an interim period where HMOs were taken over and hospitals still weren't buying everybody up. And so I became the senior partner when Steve, the other doctor, ended up leaving, but I ended up hiring a number of physicians and we grew it to 5 physicians by the time I ended up leaving. But I was in that group for 18 years and we grew it. And
it sounds like you were a pretty good practice manager, at least what I get from looking at your bio. You set up an IT system in the age of growing demand for electronic medical records. Have I got that right?
Yeah, you could get differing opinions on my ability to manage the practice. I think like a lot of doctors at that point in time, I really didn't want to do much in the business side of medicine. And so looking back, one of my regrets in that was that I didn't really involve myself in that, in the business side. And the reality is that a private medical practice is first a business and then a medical practice. Because if you don't have a business, then you can't have a medical practice. And I don't mean that the business is more important. It's just first. you have to have money to practice medicine. And so first and foremost, you have to earn money to pay yourself and your staff. Then you can practice medicine and do what your mission is, which is to care for people.
And I'm going to guess that throughout the entirety of your training, nobody really had a discussion with you about that very subject that you're talking about.
And that's actually one area that family practice was much superior to MedPeds, because at least you worked in an office setting and you learned a lot more about that. I learned basically clinical. And so now the fact that I went to Indiana was significant in that they were one of the very, very first to use computers in everything. And so back in the early 90s, we had computerized order entry. We had all of these other things. And so I got spoiled. And going to paper charts just seemed crazy.
Yeah, and if you were doing that in the 80s, you were way ahead of the curve.
Yeah. And so I actually ended up, my partner and I decided that, and this was for patient care. We just realized that we couldn't do good patient care if our records were disorganized. And so we ended up doing an EMR. I think we started in 97 on Medical Logic. And I quickly was, again, focused not on the EMR, the electronic health record. I was focused on improving quality of care. That was kind of my obsession through that. It was such an obsession that I eventually became and they were bought by GE. Centricity is what it ended up becoming. But I was president of their national user group and was on their board for 4 years. And eventually our practice actually won HIMSS, the Davies Award for primary care, for use of computers in a health primary care setting. And so we were nationally recognized for what I did, basically, because I was obsessed by it.
It's quite a story, and I'm going to bet that what you had put together at that point in the evolution of the electronic medical record was much more of a medical record than what we see today.
Yes, that was eventually taken over by the billing needs, and I got disgusted eventually with that system, and that was part of my frustration, part of what eventually led to me.
So they took your product and you found yourself using something that kind of made you miserable?
Eventually, yeah. And as time went by, I felt more and more it was about data collection and about coding properly and not about patient care. And I got more and more frustrated. And I remember I ended up leaving the Evans Medical Group about 8 years ago. And I remember probably about 9 years ago, just realizing I don't feel like I'm able to give good care to anybody because I don't have the time to give to them. I'm just rolling people through. I'm not caring for people who are outside of the office. We're forcing them to come in. And it was at that point in time that my partners, I think what they realized is that my obsession with patient care was getting in the way of the business. And that's why I laugh about you saying that I was good at business, because I think actually I tried to have my cake and eat it. And that was my interpersonal skills maybe weren't as good. And I didn't get them to buy in, but they were wanting to focus on the business, which was taking us away from quality of care. And I just,
well, Rob, don't you think that at some point, if we're going to talk about business and who's going to be successful, am I wrong to think that you really should think about what your business exists for?
Yeah, I think so. I think you really need to understand your values and how you want to make an impact, because your business can exist to make a lot of money and it to support your lifestyle. I've always been kind of a missionally oriented person, and I don't mean that necessarily in a religious way. I mean it in that I just like to care for the people that I take care of, and have always been trying to find ways to allow the business to let me do that. And that's really hard in medicine in the fee-for-service world.
Yeah.
But the lights went on about 8 years ago when I was introduced to direct primary care.
Yeah. So, and that's where my interest in you came from, because it's really a great story, and I want to hear more about what was in your head at that point when you were heavily involved in a practice that you had actually built from the ground up, that was no longer serving you in a more emotional way. It was serving you financially, I suspect.
Yeah, it was.
And so you make the decision that I'm just going to get out of here and do it in a different way. So there's got to be a great story behind how that happened, and I and our listeners are ready to hear it. So carry on, my friend.
It wasn't just my decision. It was, to some extent, us kind of realizing that I was not compatible with my partners, and I was going to try and make it work, but.
And when you say us, you're talking about you and the partners.
Yeah. And it really, I was like, I want to make it work. And they were the ones who ended up saying, I don't think it can. That was one of the harder moments in my life, realizing that I would either have to take a subservient non-leadership role and follow what their direction they wanted to go. And again, some of that comes to my lack of leadership skills, and how I just basically did what I did because I felt like it. But some of it was their problem too. It's like a divorce. You can point to one person, you can point to another, but it was definitely ended up being mutual. And hadn't decided on direct primary care when we decided to end my role in the practice. And so it was just really fortunate for me. I was actually doing quite a bit of writing at that point in time. I had a medical blog. I still do. I just don't write very often now, but I was that point in time writing, 2 times a week. And it was a pretty popular medical blog, actually. And one of the things I was writing about healthcare stuff and about how sick our healthcare system is. I was writing about IT. I was writing about, and my stuff was getting republished in a number of places. And one of the guys who read it is a guy named Dave Chase. And Dave Chase comes from the insurance side of things. And he wrote about the sickness of the healthcare system then. And he and I kind of built this mutual admiration society. And we actually ended up talking. And he's from Seattle, which is kind of the epicenter of where direct primary care, Garrison Bliss, and there were a bunch of direct care doctors, even in the 90s, that was starting to become something early on.
I have to say, I'm fascinated that you found a kindred spirit in the insurance industry.
Yeah, I was fascinated too, but he is just one of the genuinely good people. And he is like, Rob, you need to do direct primary care. And I was like, what's that? I mean, because I thought about concierge practice, doing MDVIP, and I didn't like the fact that that would exclude a lot of my patients for financial reasons, that my Medicare population, a lot of them I couldn't take care of. And certainly my poor patients, if I'm charging $200 a month, you're not going to be able to do that. And he was like, well, direct care, they charge a lot less, and you just have a larger panel, and yeah, you do less for them, but it is, I don't know, it's essentially direct primary care involves two main things. The first is that you don't accept any payment from the insurance companies at all. You get paid only by your patients. And so in some of the concierge practices, I know that some of the MD VIPs, they'll do for non-billable, that they'll bill, but then they do the monthly fee for non-billable services. And so they'll do both. Direct care by definition is no, you don't accept insurance money for your services. And you don't file and your insurance for stuff. Now there are a couple of little exceptions in our practice, but it's basically the truth that the vast majority of my revenue comes from patients paying directly.
Were you the first person in Augusta to do DPC?
I was one of the first in the state of Georgia. Yeah. There were probably 100 practices in the country when I started in 2013, maybe 200, but there weren't many. And now there's probably 1,500, and it's growing much more rapidly. But the other thing is that instead of paying fee for service, you're paid on a monthly basis. And that's the other thing. And both of those together redirect it. And when Dave started talking about it, it just clicked with me that this aligns all of the things that I want to do for my patients. This makes it so that spending more time with people is good, that I can give them care outside of the office without having to compromise my finances, whether it's virtual visits or whether it's text messaging or whatever. It just matters the care that I give. And I came up with this idea of the continuum of care, which is not care that's in the office. I like to say that the it's far more important what happens between office visits than what happens in the office visit. And yet our focus tends to be on the office visit. And really, you do a mild amount of care. And yes, you direct stuff and you can make critical decisions, but the lifestyle that they live, do they take their medicines? How are they eating? Are they exercising? What's their stress level? Have they lost their job? All of these types of things that play into the health of these people, that you don't see and interact with. And so this idea of what if we made care that was multiple touches? What if we made care that allowed for a bunch of little touches, rather than just come to my office every 3 months and we'll catch up on everything. And it just made so much more sense. And so in 2013,
and clearly it's worked out nicely for you. Yeah. So you've been at it for right about between 7 and 8 years, I guess.
That's correct.
And we'll give us some numbers. How has it grown? What has it been like for you? Those kind of details.
And well, one of the fortunate things for me was that upon leaving my old practice, I was allowed to market to my patient base, and I thought, my patients love me because that actually was. But I thought, oh, my patients, I'll have 1,000 patients really soon because, whatever. Only about 200 patients followed me, which in looking back is actually pretty good because nobody knew what the heck I was doing. They just trusted me But they didn't know anything about direct care. Nowadays, people are learning about it, and it's much easier to get people to switch over. But back then, it was just this weird thing, and people weren't as angry about their health care as they are now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started out with around 200 patients and had one nurse, and I've grown it through. The first year was really rough financially, but I had money saved and worked through that. And I've just grown it, and now I'm at about 800 patients, which is actually quite large for a direct care
practice. It's a lot of growth.
Yeah. And I would say that my income now substantially exceeds what my income was when I left my old practice. And my quality of care is just not even close, and my quality of life is, it's just so much better.
I
the
can
busiest,
only imagine.
The most patients I've ever seen in any given day in the office is 15. And that would have been a ridiculously slow day in my old practice. And it takes some getting used to, because at first you say, gosh, the office is empty. I don't like this. And then you realize I'm getting paid just as much with the empty office as I would if I had a full office. And it's like, And took a long time to adjust to that. But now, a slow day it's nice.
So what does it look like from the patient side? I imagine that your patients still have to have insurance. I mean, if they got to have a gallbladder operation or something of that nature, they can't just go bare. So what's it like for them?
There is a substantial uninsured population in most towns, and for those who are uninsured, or let's say they work for a small business that doesn't offer insurance. Direct care there are a number of businesses that offer our services, at least as a primary care part of a benefit, a primary care benefit to their employees. So I do.
So you have
I have
patients whose employers will actually pay your fee so that they have a doctor.
Yeah. And
what a doctor, smart idea for them.
Yeah, it is. It helps them retain employees, and plus we can offer care that keeps people from having to spend hours and hours in the doctor's office. So, but
do you have any idea about what the ratio is of insured to uninsured in the entirety of your 800 patients?
It has varied. At one point in time, it was probably 60% uninsured. That's probably now flipped back to about 60% insured, or even a little bit higher insured. For some reason, the insured population has gone up. And I don't really know why. It's not like it's that much more affordable to have insurance.
Do you think, and I know I'm asking you to speculate a little bit, but do you think that for the insured patient, they probably are getting a better deal financially in your practice than they would in the more conventional practice, simply because the copays and all that nonsense goes away, or not?
But I think it's more than that. I mean, certainly I am focused very much on value for my patients. And the truth is, if they feel like they're not getting their money's worth, they just leave. They can do that anytime. There are primary care practices that would pick them up. They feel like they get they can text message me with questions on the weekend. They have access to me. And there's some folks who question whether it's worth it, but the truth is, and there have been people who are like, well, we got insurance, so we're going to leave. And those folks, that is probably the best testimony, is a high percentage of those folks end up coming back because they realize that just because you have insurance doesn't mean you have to accept frustrating and lesser quality care, and that primary care is different. Primary care is just different. And so, it's really important for people to feel like they're getting good primary care, because that can turn around and lessen their need for specialty care and lessen their hospitalization and such.
But I can understand how people who do have insurance and they're paying through the nose for it, unless they have a really generous employer, and that's kind of rare.
Right.
I can understand how they might wonder why they should pay this extra fee to you so that they can have a doctor, because ostensibly, they get whatever they get from the insurance company, but yet they go in there and there's always a copay, and same for the medicines and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure someone has done the arithmetic on it, although it would be sort of complicated, and it would really be interesting to find out if the balance is pretty close or not.
It varies from person to person. I would say that overall, though, yes, we give better care. There are studies of DPC and in quality measures and such, and hospitalization rates and those types of stuff. And there's no question that the fact that I keep people out of the hospital on a regular basis because we intervene early. We see people, we can see people on the day of, for most days I have tons of openings in my schedule before the day starts. In fact, it's very, very rare that my schedule is full at the beginning of a day. So most of the time, if somebody has a need to be seen, we can see them right away and handle problems when they're small. Or where somebody sends me a text message and says, doc, I'm having right lower quadrant pain and that kind of stuff. And I talked to him on text message in an evening and realized, no, he's not vomiting. It's kind of a crampy intermittent pain, especially when he eats, but he doesn't have signs of appendicitis. And so I bring him in the next morning, and normally the doctor on call would have just sent him to the ER.
Exactly.
And I know him first. I know this person, and this guy was an EMT actually, and we just had a conversation about it. But then, we're able to work through all this, and I saw him the next morning, and it was not an appendicitis. And so that's just one example. That's just a typical day. Now it's all COVID-19 stuff. Everybody's asking questions about that, but they have access to a doctor who will answer those questions of, should I get the MMR shot? What do you recommend as far as, school? Should I send my kids to school or not? What do you think? And I've really taken an active role in educating my patients and giving them resources to get the best care and see beyond the politics and just see from a medical standpoint what the right thing to do is.
So, what happens when someone has to be hospitalized? Do you have admitting privileges? Do you round? Do you turn it over to the hospitalists? What happens in that circumstance?
I long ago turned over my care to the hospitalist. So my hospital medicine skills are I don't have a lot of confidence in them anymore.
Sure.
But what I do is I will take care of people. The problem with hospitalists are that they don't see, and not all are this way, but most of them are, and specialists too, that they see what they are doing, and they see it in the patient as a whole is within their hospitalized setting. They don't really think about the care that's been given them over the past 10 years or whatever. And it's basically they take care of their business, and then they kick the can over to me and let me take over. And so my patients can call me and text message me while they're in the hospital and say, hey, I don't understand this. Hey, this is what they're doing. And so I can serve as an expert advisor, a translator, and saying, oh, this is probably, or maybe you ask them about this, and serve as just an advisor, a medical advisor during that setting. And so
you're not completely disconnected at all.
No, in fact, again, the ability to text message makes it a lot easier. And let me just say, in a given evening, I still, with 800 patients, I'll get maybe 5 or 6 text messages the whole evening. It's not like I'm constantly getting text messages from my patients, and I've gone weekends with like 2 text messages the whole weekend.
Are the hospitalists and the specialists in the hospital, are they interested at all in having a conversation with you while they're taking care of your patient? Do you get follow-up letters from those people? What is that like?
Some of them, the academic, Augusta University here, they're actually really good that way, and they'll text message me, and I interact with some of those docs a lot more than I do in the private fee-for-service world. I think the private fee-for-service world, they're feeling so pressured, and they don't want to add a layer of complication by talking to the doctor. And now, most of them are intrigued by what I do. I will say that when I switched over to DPC, I was I got a lot of attaboys, a lot of pats on the back from specialists and from even other primary care doctors who were very jealous but they also thought that I was nuts, that it was a big risk. Sure. They were glad that I was the one taking the risk, and they're all watching to see. And the truth is, the pandemic has been a case study in the superiority of this business model, in the sense that whereas most of my primary care colleagues have taken it on the chin, and many of the specialist colleagues have really taken it on the chin as the volume of office visits have gone down, and the payment model for virtual care is still not very good. My income didn't take a drop at all. In fact, July was my best financial month ever. And it's continuing to rise, not go down. So, whereas they had to take out business loans to support themselves, and it's really hard for the primary care practices like my old group, actually, who were not owned by hospitals, their revenue just dried up, and they can't do that for very long. And so
that's a fact.
Yeah. My revenue, again, my churn rate, which is, when you have a subscription model, you have something called churn, which says this is the amount of subscriptions that you're losing each month. How many people are leaving the practice? My churn rate is generally less than 1%. It's around 1% of the people, and some of them are that somebody who just doesn't pay their monthly payment, and we give them 1 month kind of grace period, and after that we just cut them off, and they don't get refills. And a lot of times they'll reinstate because it's like, oh, I didn't realize. And of course they did realize, but they understand that we control whether or not they get the care that they want, and we make it easy for them to you just got to pay your bills that were due, and so our collection rate is well over 98%. I mean, there's not even our 90-day accounts receivable is under $200. It's nothing. We collect everything that we bill because we collect it up front, and if they don't, then they leave the practice, and that's just the way it goes. It's a very easy business model. I like to say it's so easy, even a doctor can do it.
Well, Rob, this has been absolutely fascinating, and I'm so grateful that you were willing to take the time to be with us today. But as you know, the name of the program is Prescription for Success, and we are at the point where we want to hear from you along those lines. So I'm going to close my mic for as long as it takes, and Dr. Rob Lamberts from Augusta, Georgia, is going to give us his personal prescription for success.
All right. Well, my prescription for success is, first off, you have to define success for yourself properly. And by that, I mean what we had talked about earlier, the idea of setting your values. My chief value was to give quality medical care. And I did also have the value of being able to run a business well. And my obsession with electronic medical records were about quality patient care. And switching over to direct care was about giving quality care and trying to find a way of doing that and having a good business. And I told my patients that it wasn't that I had changed. That's not why I went to direct primary care. It was that I refused to change. And so I was willing to take a huge financial risk. I went through some pretty rough times the first couple of years of my practice. And a lot of that was because of the newness of direct primary care. But the key is that I believed that I was doing the right thing in it. My unwavering belief in that is what really got me through those hard times. And so define what your success is. That's my first thing. The second thing is to focus on the small, but think big. I realized that I can only affect my small population of patients. In fact, I had to contract the amount of people that I was taking care of. My old practice had 3,000 patients. This has 800 patients. So in the sense that I was able to make it smaller, but I was able to give better care. And then through my writing, through mentoring other physicians, I have influenced a lot of other people to move into this direction. We had three other providers in the Augusta area now join me and do direct primary care. And I'm working with them to get their practices larger. And so the idea is that I'm having a much bigger impact on things just by focusing on doing the right thing that's in front of me, and also being willing to teach. And the last of my prescription of success is to be patient. One of the things that happened early on was that I had these grandiose visions of what the perfect direct primary care practice would look like, that I'd have all my ducks in a row for all of my patients, have perfect medical records for everybody, have everybody gets their colonoscopy or has it documented, and all of these things. And I remember after a month feeling like I am falling down on my face about this. I'm not able to accomplish it yet. It was only a month. I ended up talking to Dave Chase, the guy I mentioned earlier, the insurance guy, and he just basically told me not to be an idiot, and that it's only been a month, and actually he pointed me towards the book, The Lean Startup, and the idea of the Lean Startup is to pick out your minimum viable product and focus on that. And so it got me thinking, what is it that my patients are actually paying me for? Are they paying me for this huge vision, this roadmap, and all of these things? No, what they really care about, what they're willing to pay for, is access to me, access to care. They don't feel like they have access. And I was able to give them that access through direct care, and sharpened my focus on that, and did everything around that to focus on access, and subsequently have built out and added some of those things back, giving them value, giving them other types of things. But what my patients really wanted was me. And that's why most of them, the ones who followed me over, they followed me not because of the business model, but because they liked me as their doctor and wanted to keep it that way. Now I'm working towards exceeding those expectations, but that's 8 years out that I'm doing this. So focus on just be patient in the process and keep your focus small and let it grow in that. And that's my RX for success.
Well, Rob Lamberts, thank you so much for sharing that wisdom with us. And there is a lot of wisdom in there. In addition to sharing this very interesting story that you have, it is so unusual, I think, that we find anything in the world of healthcare today that is truly unique. But this idea of direct primary care is unquestionably unique, and you have shown that it can be done, and it can be done very successfully. And I am more than grateful that you're willing to take the time and share the story with us.
Can I add one additional thing?
Sure, you could add as much as you like.
Okay. I like my job. I like practicing medicine a lot. And that's the thing that you're not hearing in medicine anymore. And Ed Boland, the doctor who joined me last year, I remember he had worked in urgent care, and he was just miserable doing it. He just felt like he was just really getting to the point where he was ready to quit medicine. And he joined me, and Davis Mellick and his wife, who are both PAs, they joined us as well in a different location. But I remember talking to Ed after a month in, and I said, "So what do you think?" His practice was just starting slowly, and he was just figuring it out. And he looked at me, and the look in his eyes saying, "I love it. This is what I wanted to do all along. This is the medicine that I wanted to practice." And our patients have that same response. We like to say that you don't have to say "I'm sorry" all the time. You don't have to say "I'm sorry I made you wait." You had to, that I only have 5 minutes with you, that I'm looking at the computers all the time. We're saying "you're welcome" all the time to these people, and they're just delighted with their doctor's visits and with the care they're giving. So it really is a happy area of medicine. And that doesn't mean I don't have hard days and have stuff that bothers me, but on the whole, it's just like I'm able to breathe again. It's like I'm able to give care. And, it was my cure for burnout.
That must have been indescribably gratifying to you to hear from one of your own colleagues that you led them into something that gave them the satisfaction that they'd probably been looking for their entire professional life.
Absolutely. That's why that look in his eyes is forever etched in my heart, because it was a vindication to a great extent. It's like, yep, it's not just me. It's like somebody who tells you your kids are cute. It's like, well, I thought so too, but it's really nice to hear it from you.
Well, thanks again for sharing all this with us. And before we go, there are a lot of places where people can find you. I probably would not have known about you except for the fact that you've got a TEDx talk out there, which is very informative and very entertaining. And there's other stuff. You've got publications and blogs and this and that. So I want to give you a moment to tell everybody how and where to find you. So give us the details.
Well, my TEDx talk is entitled "Hi, I'm Rob, and I'm a recovering doctor." And you can just look into that. Just Rob Lamberts is, if you do that, it'll come up pretty quickly. My practice website is drlamberts.org, DOCTORLAMBERTS, and remember the S at the end, .org. And you can learn about my practice and what we charge and all the rest of those details there. And my actually very active Facebook page, just search Rob Lamberts. I have a ton of folks that I communicate with on a pretty regular basis. Twitter, Doc Rob, DOC_Rob. And my blog, which someday I'm going to start writing more frequently on, but you can look at all of my past writings. And those are, that is actually called Musings of a Distractible Mind. And it's more-distractible.org. And that's pretty much the best ways to find me.
Well, thanks again for being with us today, Dr. Rob Lamberts, direct primary care physician in Augusta, Georgia. It's been a great pleasure. Thanks again.
It's been a pleasure for me, Randy. Thank you.
And that brings us to the close of another episode of Prescription for Success. We would really appreciate it if you would become a subscriber to our podcast. When you do that, you can get even more information about our guests by reviewing the show notes on our website at rxforsuccesspodcast.com. And when you're there, please leave us a comment, and if you feel inclined, give us a 5-star rating as well. You can also support the show by becoming a patron. To do that, just visit patreon.com/RX for Success podcast. Thank you so very much for listening today, and don't forget to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.